The night it happened, the air in the house felt wrong. Not colder, not warmer, just different. As if the walls themselves had leaned closer to listen. Celine Marlowe had grown up believing her family's home was unshakable, like the people inside it. A sprawling old place by the lake, its windows framed with ivy, its wooden floors whispering history with every step. But that night, standing in the dim hallway outside her parents' bedroom, she felt the first crack in that illusion. It began with voices. Her mother, Ariane, spoke in the sharp, breathless tone she only used when furious but trying not to shout. "You think she doesn't notice? You think she doesn't see the way you look at her?" And then her father's voice, Kieran, lower, defensive. "Don't start. You've been imagining things for months." Celine leaned closer, her bare feet silent on the old rug. She wasn't supposed to be awake, but the words pulled her forward like a magnet. Ariane's voice trembled. "Imagining? She's your niece, Kieran." Celine froze. Her mind tripped over the word niece. She only had one cousin close enough to be called that, Leora. Sweet, laughing Leora who had come to live with them 6 months ago after her parents' sudden deaths. Kieran didn't deny it. He didn't even speak for several seconds. And that silence told Celine more than anything else could have. When he finally did speak, his voice was measured. "You've always been jealous of the way people like her. She's young, she's vibrant." The slap cracked through the air. Celine's stomach lurched. She wanted to run into the room to shout at them both to stop. But her body stayed pressed to the wall, frozen between instinct and fear. Ariane's voice broke then, raw and shaking. "You've destroyed this family." Karen's reply was quieter, colder. "You've never understood me." Celine didn't wait to hear more. She slipped back to her room, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling until the pale light of morning made her wish she could unhear everything. The weeks that followed were worse. Her mother stopped smiling. Her father stayed out later and later. Leora, who had once been her closest friend, started avoiding her eyes at breakfast. And through it all, no one said the truth aloud. But Celine wasn't blind. She saw the way her father's gaze lingered on Leora when she passed him in the hall. She saw the way Leora's shoulders tensed when his hand brushed hers. She heard the muffled arguments late at night, the sudden silences when she entered a room. By spring, Ariane was gone. She left without a note, without a goodbye, her closet stripped bare. Karen told Celine her mother was sick and needed time away. He told her not to contact her. He told her Leora needed their protection now, that they had to be a new kind of family. Celine didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. She was 17, stuck in a house that felt more like a locked cage with each passing day. And then, one morning, she found Leora crying in the kitchen. Leora's hand shook as she tried to pour tea, spilling hot water onto the counter. "He's sending me away," she whispered. "Why?" Celine asked. But deep down, she already knew. Leora's eyes darted toward the doorway. "He says I've been ungrateful, that I've embarrassed him. I think," she swallowed, "I think he's done with me." That same day, a car came to take Leora to a boarding school 2 hours away. She didn't look back when she left. Celine watched from the window, feeling a new kind of emptiness settle in her chest. For the next 3 years, she barely saw her father. He lived in the same house, but seemed to exist in a different world, traveling constantly, bringing home strangers who stayed for weekends and vanished. He never spoke of her mother. He never mentioned Leora. By the time Celine was 20, she had learned to stop expecting love from him. But she had also learned something else. She had learned how to listen, how to wait, how to let bitterness grow roots so deep they couldn't be pulled out. The moment that turned her bitterness into a plan came quietly. She was clearing out the attic when she found a box of letters. They were addressed to her, hundreds of them, all written by her mother over the past 3 years. None of them had been delivered. Some were short, full of longing. Others were desperate, begging her to write back. A few explained everything: how Kiran had driven her away, how he had controlled her money, how he had threatened to ruin her if she ever tried to take Celine with her. Celine read them all in one night, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the pages. That was the night she stopped waiting for her father to change. That was the night she decided he would pay. And it wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be loud. It would be the kind of revenge that would seep into his life so slowly he wouldn't notice it at first. By the time he realized, he would be standing in the ruins of everything he cared about, and she would be the one who had built those ruins brick by brick. Celine's plan began with something small: names. She made a list of everyone her father valued: old friends, business partners, lovers, people who thought they owed him loyalty. She studied them the way a surgeon studies anatomy, learning where to cut for maximum damage. She started showing up at places they frequented, striking up casual conversations, letting them see her as harmless, even sweet. She never spoke ill of her father, at least not at first. She let them bring him up. And when they did, she listened more than she talked, storing every detail. By the end of that first year, she knew more about Kieran's world than he did, and she had already begun to dismantle it. One friendship gone sour here, one whispered doubt planted there, one opportunity accidentally missed because the right person didn't get the right call. No one suspected her. Why would they? She was just his quiet daughter, polite and forgettable. But Celine had learned the power of being underestimated. She didn't rush. She let months pass between each move. She made sure nothing could be traced back to her. And all the while, she built a web so fine and invisible that when her father finally stepped into it, it would tighten around him from every side. But there was one piece missing: Leora. Finding Leora wasn't easy. Celine started with the boarding school, but it had closed down 2 years earlier. The forwarding records were sealed. The few staff she tracked down claimed they didn't remember every student. Lies, Celine could tell, but lies meant to protect someone. It took another 9 months before she found a trace: an old photo buried deep in a community blog for a small coastal town called Marin's Reach. In it, a smiling young woman with cropped hair was serving coffee at an outdoor cafe. The caption read, "Leora, our favorite barista." Celine stared at that image for a long time. Leora looked different. Older, a little thinner, with a shadow in her smile. But it was her. She didn't go to Marin's Reach right away. She waited another 2 months, letting her father think she was busy with work. She fed him small lies about her life, the kind that made him believe she was content. When she finally went, she arrived without warning. She didn't tell Leora she was coming. She just walked into that cafe on a foggy Tuesday morning and ordered tea. Leora didn't recognize her at first, but when their eyes met, the mug in Leora's hand trembled slightly. They didn't speak much during that first meeting. Too much unsaid, too much weight in the air. Celine simply told her, "I know what he did. I know why you left." Leora's lips pressed together. She nodded once. The next day, they met again, and the words came easier. Leora told her about the months leading up to her exile, how Kieran's charm had turned to control, how he'd made her feel complicit in things she hadn't wanted. She confessed she'd cut contact with everyone, terrified he might find her. Celine listened without judgment, though her insides burned. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to offer comfort, it was to say, "I'm going to destroy him." Leora blinked, taken aback. "Celine, I don't mean a public scandal. I mean everything. His friends, his lovers, his money, his pride. Piece by piece until there's nothing left but the shell of him. And I want you to help me." At first, Leora refused. She said she wanted nothing to do with Kieran anymore. But Celine was patient. She planted the idea slowly, revisiting the pain, reminding her of the control he had on her. She made sure Leora remembered not just what he'd done to her, but what he'd taken from both of them. 3 months later, Leora agreed. Their first joint move was small but precise. A man named Halvin Rourke, one of Kieran's oldest friends. Halvin was wealthy but deeply insecure about his reputation. Celine orchestrated a chance meeting at a gallery opening, charming him into thinking she was interested in art investments. Leora, meanwhile, reconnected with Halvin's wife under the guise of shared volunteer work. Over 6 months, they quietly fed the couple seeds of suspicion about each other. By the time Halvin's marriage imploded, Kieran's long-standing alliance with him was gone, replaced by bitter resentment. Kieran didn't notice the pattern at first. When one business deal collapsed, he blamed market changes. When an old friend stopped returning calls, he chalked it up to busy schedules. Celine made sure each blow was just far enough apart that he never connected them. But Leora noticed something else. Kieran had started drinking more. He was more irritable when Celine visited, less careful about hiding the tension in his life. Then came the turning point. Celine and Leora targeted a woman named Ilara Wynn, a socialite who had been Kieran's on-and-off lover for nearly a decade. Ilara had influence over him in ways others didn't. Her approval could make or break his public persona. They didn't go after her directly. Instead, they cultivated a friendship with her younger sister, whom they accidentally introduced to a man with a known history of affairs. The fallout was spectacular. Ilara's sister humiliated in public, Ilara blaming Kieran for introducing the man to their circle. Within weeks, Ilara was gone from Kieran's life, taking several valuable connections with her. That was the first time Celine saw her father truly unsettled. Over dinner one evening, he muttered, "People change," almost to himself. Celine kept her face neutral, but inside she felt the first real thrill of her work. The years rolled on, and with each passing season, Kieran's world got smaller. He became more isolated, more distrustful. Celine played the dutiful daughter, visiting just often enough to maintain the illusion of care. She never hinted at her role in his decline. But there was one thing she hadn't yet touched: his money. That would come last. That would be the blow he couldn't recover from. By the time she was 28, Celine had spent nearly a decade on her revenge. Leora had moved back to the city under a new identity, looming quietly but always ready to step in when Celine needed her. The final act was close, but Celine wasn't rushing it. She wanted Kieran to feel safe again, just for a moment, before she pulled the last thread. Celine had been planning this moment for so long that she could map it in her head like the streets of her childhood. The years of dismantling Karen's alliances, bleeding away his influence, were only the groundwork. The final stage would be intimate, deliberate, and designed to make him feel like he'd done it to himself. The first seed was an investment opportunity, or rather a trap disguised as one. Through a false network of shell companies, Celine created a seemingly legitimate startup specializing in boutique real estate. Every detail was meticulously crafted to appeal to Karen's pride. Exclusivity, old-world charm, whispers of high returns from a few trusted acquaintances, each of whom Celine had cultivated for years. Karen bit. Of course he did. It was a small amount at first, just enough to test the waters. But the returns Celine fed him were prompt, consistent, and just shy of dazzling. He reinvested. Over 18 months, she siphoned nearly every liquid asset he had into this phantom venture. She made sure the paperwork was flawless. She made sure every false face she met seemed genuine. And, most importantly, she made sure he believed it had been his idea from the start. While the money drain worked quietly, she worked on his stability. She encouraged old acquaintances of his, people she knew could no longer tolerate him, to come forward with petty grievances, disguised as concerned advice. She seeded whispers in the right ears that Karen's judgment was slipping, that his once legendary instincts were clouded by age and drink. Karen began overcorrecting, making poor decisions just to prove himself right, and each misstep only tightened the noose. The real beauty of the plan was that Celine never had to raise her voice or reveal her hand. She was simply there, visiting with a smile, bringing small gifts, sharing carefully chosen stories about how hard it is to trust people these days. One winter night, she found him in his study, staring at a half-finished glass of whiskey. His face had that hollow look of a man who's been chasing something for years without catching it. "You ever feel," he said without looking at her, "like everyone you've ever known has turned their back on you?" Celine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe you should ask yourself why." The collapse came in spring. Karen received a letter from his bank confirming the liquidation of several accounts he'd earmarked for the real estate project. Days later, he realized the company had vanished. No trace, no contact. Celine was in the room when he slammed his fist onto the table, roaring about betrayal, fraud, the stupidity of trusting the wrong people. She let him rage. She let him spiral into paranoia. She let him believe that the world had conspired to strip him bare. And when he was finally quiet, breathing hard, she looked him in the eye and said, "It wasn't the world, Father. It was me." The silence was thick enough to choke on. His mouth opened, but no words came. Celine stood, calm and deliberate, and told him everything. Every friend she'd turned, every lover she'd driven away, every penny she'd stolen. She told him about Leora. She told him about the night she learned the truth. Karen's face went through stages: disbelief, fury, something like grief. But underneath it all was the dawning horror that every inch of his ruin had been engineered by his own daughter. He didn't beg, he didn't apologize. He just said, "You've destroyed your own blood." Celine's voice was cold. "You destroyed it first." She left him that night, walking out into the rain with no coat, no umbrella. She didn't look back. Leora was waiting in the car, watching her closely. "Is it done?" Leora asked. Celine nodded, but there was no triumph in her face, only a strange, aching emptiness. The cost of her revenge revealed itself in the months that followed. Karen's health deteriorated rapidly, and though she told herself she didn't care, the knowledge gnawed at her in quiet moments. Friends she'd used as pawns kept their distance, sensing the darkness in her methods. Even Leora, grateful as she was, sometimes looked at Celine with the flicker of unease. Celine had won, utterly, completely, but yet the victory felt like living in a house where every mirror was cracked. The last time she saw her father was in a care facility. He was thinner, his voice weaker, but his eyes were sharp when they met hers. "You could have left me with something," he rasped. Celine leaned close and said, "I did. I left you the truth." She walked away before he could answer. This time, she didn't look back either. Celine's revenge had taken years, and it had worked perfectly. But in destroying him, she had built herself into something colder, something lonelier. And though she would never admit it aloud, she knew that some part of her had gone with him into the ruin.